This is Steve Walkenday.
This is Ann Walkenday.
This is Governor Staten.
This is David Hodnotsary.
This is Professor Gregory Smith, and I give you Jackson Snyder Presents.
And you're listening to Jackson Snyder Presents.
Shipping out peeling onions, so we're not keeping her.
Okay, will it light up?
No, don't touch it anymore. The strangest thing happened to me today. I was resting on Shabbat, and I was listening to an audiobook by New York Times best-selling author of fiction, Dean Koontz. The name of the book is Eyes of Darkness. I picked it up on YouTube and had been listening to it for a few days, and so I thought I would take a Shabbat nap near the end of the audiobook, and then I heard something that made me perk up. The book is about biological warfare, and rather than give you the plot, since you can find it on YouTube, you could listen to it yourself. But I got to this part, and I thought, this sounds very similar to what's happening today with the coronavirus. As I was thinking this, the word that came out of my speakers was Wuhan 400. And I thought, this is close to what's happened today. Then I listened to a little more and checked up on the date that the novel was written, 1981. Then I thought it was even more unique, if there is such a thing, that let's see, 10, 20, 30, nearly 30 years later. Is that right? 1990, that's 10. 2000, that's 20. 2010 is 30. Almost 40 years later. Hey, when you get old, time goes so fast you've got to count it on your fingers. So I listened to the book the rest of the way through, and at the end of the novel, there is some explanation by one of the characters in regards to raising funds in Congress for special projects, covert projects, by filching funding that was meant for other purposes. So first off, I want to entertain you with the part of the novel that I had heard first, or I heard about this biological weapon. Let you listen to it, see what you think. There are some similarities and there are some differences. Then I'll come back on and put on the final part that talks about funding. Maybe you'll be surprised, maybe you won't. Since hearing that earlier today, I saw that maybe one other person has come up with this on YouTube, but I swear to you, I knew nothing about that. I just heard it. So you're going to hear it too, though the voice has been changed for obvious reasons. Here it is, an excerpt from The Eyes of Darkness by Dean Koontz. About 9 hours in.
Tina removed an electrode from Danny's neck, carefully peeling the tape off his skin. The child still clung to her, but his deeply sunken eyes were riveted on Dombey. I'm not interested in the philosophy or morality of biological warfare, Tina said. Right now, I just want to know how the hell Danny wound up in this place. To understand that, Dombey said, you have to go back 20 months. It was around then that a Chinese scientist named Li Chen defected to the United States, carrying a diskette record of China's most important and dangerous new biological weapon in a decade. They call the stuff Wuhan 400 because it was developed at their rDNA labs outside of the city of Wuhan, and it was the 400th viable strain of man-made microorganisms created at that research center. Wuhan 400 is a perfect weapon. It afflicts only human beings. No other living creature can carry it, and like syphilis, Wuhan 400 can't survive outside a living human body for longer than a minute, which means it can't permanently contaminate objects or entire places the way anthrax and other virulent microorganisms can, and when the host expires, the Wuhan 400 within him perishes a short while later, as soon as the temperature of the corpse drops below 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Do you see the advantage of all this? Tina was too busy with Danny to think about what Carl Dombey had said, but Elliot knew what the scientist meant. If I understand you, the Chinese could use Wuhan 400 to wipe out a city or a country, and then there wouldn't be any need for them to conduct a tricky and and expensive decontamination before they moved in and took over the conquered territory. Exactly, Zombie said, and Wuhan 400 has other equally important advantages over most biological agents. For one thing, you can become an infectious carrier only 4 hours after coming into contact with the virus. That's an incredibly short incubation period. Once infected, no one lives more than 24 hours. Most die in 12. It's worse than the Ebola virus in Africa. Infinitely worse. Wuhan 400's kill rate is 100%. No one is supposed to survive. The Chinese tested it on God knows how many political prisoners. They were never able to find an antibody or an antibiotic that was effective against it. The virus migrates to the brainstem, and there it begins secreting a toxin that literally eats away brain tissue like battery acid dissolving cheesecloth. It destroys the part of the brain that controls all of the body's automatic functions. The victim simply ceases to have a pulse, functioning organs, or any urge to breathe. And that's the disease Danny survived.
Amazing, no? Well, I thought so anyway. Here's the second excerpt that has to do with where such organizations get their money, and it sounds very much like the recent COVID-19 disbursement to citizens and other entities, wherein was included millions of dollars for other unrelated causes. Just listen.
Sometimes the network pinched pennies to its disadvantage, and George Lincoln Stanhope Alexander, who was an heir to both the fortune of the Pennsylvania Alexanders and to the enormous wealth of the Delaware Stanhopes, had absolutely no patience with people who were penurious. It was true that every dollar had to count, for every dollar of the network's budget was difficult to come by. Because its existence must be kept secret, the organization was funded out of misdirected appropriations meant for other government agencies. $3 billion, the largest single part of the network's yearly budget, came from the Department of Health and Welfare. The network had a deep cover agent named Jacqueline in the highest policy-making ranks of the health bureaucracy. It was Jacqueline's job to conceive new welfare programs, convince the Secretary of Health and Welfare that those programs were needed, sell them to the Congress, and then establish convincing bureaucratic shelves to conceal the fact that the programs were utterly phony, and as federal funds flowed to these false front operations, the money was diverted to the network. Chipping $3 billion out of health was the least risky of the network's funding operations, for health was so gigantic that it never missed such a petty sum. The Department of Defense, which was less flush than health and welfare these days, was nevertheless also guilty of waste, and it was good for at least another $1 billion a year. Lesser amounts, ranging from only $100 million to as much as $500 million, were secretly extracted from the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, and other government bodies on an annual basis. The network was financed with some difficulty, to be sure, but it was undeniably well funded.
Now, Snopes labels this so-called hoax mostly false. And Snopes says what is true, that indeed an image of the page that you can find in the Amazon catalog, Look Inside, is from Dean Koontz's novel, The Eyes of Darkness, and they do contain the words Wuhan 400. But Snopes also says, in its column, What's False?, Dean Koontz did not predict an outbreak of a new coronavirus. Other than the name, his fictional biological weapon had little in common with the virus that caused a real outbreak in 2020.
I'm sorry to break in here right now, Brother Snyder, but in my opinion, too, having read this book, I must agree with you and not Snopes. If we were to evaluate it a little further, I don't think we would have any trouble finding several, if not even a dozen, correspondences between the Wuhan 400 and the COVID-19. In fact, I would take the advice of some that tell us we really need to call it the China virus.
Brother, you make a great yes man.
Yes, man? What are you talking about? I disagree with you a lot of times. I'm not your yes man. Besides, I resent that particular idea that you have now, and now you've tried.
They point out truly or falsely that there was another edition of the Eyes of Darkness that calls this virus or this weapon Gorky 400. And it goes on to say, because it was developed at their rDNA labs outside of Gorky. Speaking of Russia, I think, and it was the 400th viable strain of man-made microorganisms created at that research center. So I'm not trying to debunk my own broadcast here. That second edition may or may not be the case. Snopes also says that in Kuntz's novel, Wuhan 400, it's a human-made weapon. The coronavirus, on the other hand, was not. Oh no? The coronavirus was not man-made in a laboratory? I think that virus and the idea that it came from bats or some other vermin has Snopes being debunked. After the little bit of research I've done, I am absolutely convinced that this virus was made by human beings, being financed in part by Americans, and for the purpose of being a weapon, and that it got out of the laboratory by one means or the other. Probably from the laboratory to that wet market, fish market, was located in the same place. Snopes also says that in the novel, Wuhan 400 has a 100% fatality rate. While researchers are still learning about the coronavirus, the current fatality rate sits at about 2%.
I think you mean fatality rate.
And also that the fictional Wuhan 400 has an extremely quick incubation period of about 4 hours compared to COVID-19, which has an incubation period between 2 and 14 days. And then, of course, there's an advertisement for you to send Snopes some money. We have big plans, it says. We need your help. I consider Snopes primarily not a website of facts, but rather a website of consensus. I have seen several, though I can't pick them out now, Snopes debunkings that in fact they got wrong. And in the end, if they want to be honest, they probably got this wrong too, especially in regards to the most important item on the list, which says that this is not a man-made virus and that it is not made for the purpose of being weaponized. But I leave it up to you. It sounds to me like a prophetic utterance in this book, or maybe a coincidence. However, it's too close to what we've learned in the last 6 months to be just a simple coincidence. I might also mention that if it is a prediction, it was made in 1981. And had this epidemic gone around in 1981, I suggest that biologists and virologists would not have had the research behind this virus in order to make it anything other than a close to 50 or more % kill rate. But you probably know more about this than I do. So that's about the end of this article. If you appreciate what I'm doing here, then please do subscribe. I'm approaching 800 subscribers now, and as you know, 1,000 subscribers is necessary on YouTube to move on with it. You can contact me at www.yahad.me. That's YAHAD.me, especially if you have other comments or questions about this particular little article. Is it prophetic? Is Dean Koontz a prophet? I've listened to probably 10 or more of his novels that have what might be called predictions in them, that the situations in these novels include numerous scientific breakthroughs that have come to pass in the time since they have been written. Prophecy or research? I'm listening to one now. It's called Dark Rivers of the Heart. Now, I don't know when this was written, but it sounds to me like it was written perhaps even before 1981. And there are some predictions about computer science of certain types of programs that only existed, say, within the companies of secret societies then, that are among the most popular applications today, several of which I am using right now from my desktop. Yahweh be with you, and thank you for listening to Jackson Snyder Presents Thinking Believers.
Brother Snyder wants to get to 1,000 because he thinks then he can start selling razors and shaving cream. I think. Gonna have to check Snopes.